you're about to see is our all-star cast debating the vexed question, was the Reformation a mistake? And if you want to see more than the first 15 minutes, which I'm sure you will do once you start it, you will need to become a subscriber. Go to unherd.com/live and become a subscriber now, and you can watch the whole thing as it happens, plus join in our subscriber-only Q&A and pose your questions to our debaters. That's unherd.com/live. Welcome back to the UnHerd Club. For those of you for whom it is your first time of visiting, a very special welcome. We are thrilled to have you with us tonight. Apologies for the slightly late start. We had a few technical difficulties, but we are back on track. Tonight we're taking a little trip down memory lane, all the way back to the 16th century, in fact. You can never say UnHerd is not hot on the pulse of the news, to meet young King Henry VIII. He has, at this point, been a devout Catholic all his life, attends Mass reportedly 5 times a day, which seems quite exhausting. But as we all might understand, the promise of everlasting riches of heaven is no match for the promise of a hot new girlfriend. So our Henry wanted to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon so that he could hook up with the one and only Anne Boleyn and hopefully give rise to his first male heir. But no annulment was granted by the Pope, and so in 1534 he declared that he was now the head of the Church of England. This sparked what we have come to call the Reformation, breaking from Rome in a split that would come to define modern Christianity in the West. All the while, German priest and former monk Martin Luther was brewing a new tradition of his own, one which emphasized the deeply personal and private relationship between man and God. Far from the Pope-following, priest-led churches of Catholicism, Protestants began a new way of worshipping sola scriptura. And of course, Henry's break from Rome left the door firmly open for Protestantism, bloody hell, Protestantism, to flourish in Britain. And so it did until today. Almost 500 years after Henry VIII split with Rome, we have come back to Catholicism, it seems. Catholicism is now more popular than Anglicanism in the 18 to 34 age group of churchgoers, which I will remind you are the people who will probably have the longest lives in which to explore their own religion, with 41% identifying as Catholic, up from 22% in 2018, compared with the 20% who say they are Anglican, a drop from 30% in 2018. The majority of these young Catholics, it appears, are Gen Z men, which perhaps we'll get into this evening. So given the maybe surprising resurgence of Catholic traditionalism in Britain, should we regret the break from Rome that set the whole ball rolling in the first place? Tonight we will debate that very motion. Was the Reformation a mistake? We have gathered for this noble task the finest foursome of theological gladiators into our arena of apostates. Proposing the motion tonight are Sohrab Ahmari, UnHerd's US editor and author of From Fire by Water, which you can find in the lobby outside for sale, which is about his own Catholic conversion and has finally been published in the UK, and Reverend Giles Fraser, journalist, broadcaster, and vicar of St. Anne's Church in Kew. Opposing the motion is Elizabeth Oldfield, among many things, host of the Sacred Podcast and author of Fully Alive, and Graham Tomlin, former Church of England bishop who leads the Centre for Cultural Witness. There we go, current Church of England bishop, Bishop Graham Tomlin, of course. Please give all of our debaters this evening a very warm welcome. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We're going to do this, as we always do with our debates, with opening speeches of 5 minutes here at the lectern, followed by 30 minutes of open combat, in which our debaters can scrap with each other to their heart's content and brawl in the aisle as they want. And then we'll take a short 5-minute break where you can lubricate yourselves in the bar behind you, and then we'll come back and we'll have 30 minutes of your questions, provocations, whatever you want to tell our debaters and really challenge them on some of the arguments they've made this evening. If you're watching online, then you have to be a subscriber if you want to see more than the first 15 minutes. If you want to join our free-thinking family and see the whole of this event right through to the end, then go to unherd.com/live now. I'm going to start this event with an opening vote. And the way we here at UnHerd judge our debates is by change of opinion. And so what I want to do is gauge the room a little bit before we get going. So, if you believe the Reformation was a mistake, please raise your hand now. Okay.
Look for friends.
That is good. 26. So we've got 26 proposing the motion. And if you believe the Reformation was not a mistake, raise your hand now. So to play for.
Evenly gathered. Evenly?
Yeah. I think you're ahead.
Nice strong hand at the back there. We like that.
That is 23. 23 to 26. This is nice. This is juicy. This is what we like to see. Okay, fantastic. Without further ado, I'm going to get us cracking with this debate. And welcome to the podium our first speaker in the proposition side, Sorab Ahmari.
Go, Sorab. I have my own timer because Flo said we're very harsh about time, so I'm going to address the more secular aspects of the question. I'm happy to get into like confession, priests, and so on later. But thank you to Flo and everyone else of my UnHerd colleagues who helped organize this, and thank you all for being here. So making the case against the Reformation in England, before the vote was taken, I would have thought it was like pitching Brazilian barbecue to a house of vegans. But I guess maybe my task needn't be so difficult, because whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're with me in the bark of Peter or not, there's no escaping, I think, my main argument tonight, namely that some of the West's deepest crises today trace back to the Reformation, at least its intellectual crises. The Reformation was a grave mistake, not just because it attacked the unity of the Christian church, but because it tore asunder the synthesis of faith and reason that had defined the West at its very origins. As a result, we moderns are caught between the horns of either unreasonable faith or soulless reason. That is the Reformation's darkest legacy, far more damaging than giving rise to some 47,000 Protestant sects and counting, some more nutty than others. In a superficial telling, the Reformation, of course, lifted the yoke of Roman tyranny from the European mind, an essential step toward enlightenment and modernity. In reality, the reformers trashed the philosophical foundations of faith, rendering it more prone to irrationality and fanaticism. Ancient peoples sought to explain the causes of things by recourse to myth. The Greek philosophers, however, turned to reason to uncover the deepest origins of reality. In doing so, the greatest of them concluded that there must be some absolute perfection in which all others participate, or some unmoved mover that set in motion all the change that they observed in the world. The Greeks, in short, discovered God by way of philosophy. With Alexander at the helm of their armies, they then overran many of the nations to their east. And among these were the Jews, who offered a decisive answer to the questions about ultimate causation that had haunted Greek philosophy. Their God was unlike the deities of other nations. He claimed to be a universal God, not a mere local idol, and he said his name was I Am, being itself the stuff of philosophy. And this courtship between Greek thought and Jewish religion would be consummated in Christianity. Here was the same God who, in the Christian telling, had become man, a God-man who identified himself with reason. In the beginning was Logos, reason, a reasonable God, a God in whom it was reasonable to believe and who couldn't demand that we, his creatures, act unreasonably. But Luther and company hated philosophy. In a 1520 treatise, Luther railed against the presence of Greek thought in Catholic universities. Quote, "What else are the universities than what the Book of Maccabees calls gymnasia ephiborum et Graecia gloriae, that is, places where youth are inculcated in pagan Greek ways. Jerusalem had to be defended against Athens once again, against the pernicious influence of, quote, the blind heathen teacher Aristotle, as Luther called him, whose books, quote, should be completely discarded. Elsewhere, he called reason itself the devil's whore. This wasn't just a matter of rhetoric. If men and women couldn't reason with confidence about being itself, then reason and revelation had to go their separate ways. Faith became about faith alone, while the scope of reason was sharply circumscribed to mean only reason in practical or scientific terms. So far from expanding reason's domain, the Reformation brought about, quote, a reduction of the radius of science and reason, as Pope Benedict put it in his lecture at Regensburg. Some of humankind's most fundamental ideals and yearnings are now excluded from the realm of public reason, since these can't be measured with scientific instruments or expressed in generally mathematical language. The moral claims of the great religious traditions, even those that rest solely on natural reason, are treated as a species of private bias. They're welcome in the church or mosque or synagogue, but in public they must give way to the narrower reason of scientific modernity. The danger is that this narrowly scientific reason affords humans a much lower status than the one granted them by the synthesis of classical philosophy and revealed religion that is still embodied in the Catholic Church. You can do anything to people, especially the weak and the poor, if you view human beings as mere collections of particles, lacking any specific or special origin or destiny. So for those of you who are secular, it may not matter whether Christians gather under one communion or 47,000. Likewise, you might not be particularly bothered by the way that the Reformation shattered the universality of Christian faith, essentially nationalizing it. These are some of the tragedies that followed the Reformation. Yet even the secular-minded among you are affected by this, the greatest of the Reformers' misdeeds, the untethering of faith from reason and the narrowing of reason's scope. So I urge you to vote in favor of tonight's motion and to repent and submit to the Roman Pontiff.
Thank you, Sorab. We will now turn to our first speaker for the opposition, Elizabeth Oldfield.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
I almost said no to this invitation, partly because I think classical debate, I'm questioning how useful it is, but I feel like we've got a little room for play here. Partly because I've got no desire to sit on a panel of Christians tearing chunks out of each other's traditions. And partly because I didn't know which side I fell on. I am as much of a Charles Taylor, Alistair McIntyre pilled communitarian as many of the people connected with this network. I live in a monastic-inspired, slightly Benedict option adjacent intentional community in South London. We pray parts of the medieval monastic office every day. I am no liberal progressive who doesn't see some of the challenges with the atomizing, deracinating, isolating machine of modernity.
Brilliant.
And the motion is, do we regret the Reformation? Was it a mistake? And I think we have to ask ourselves really honestly, would we go back? For all that we have lost, and we have lost lots, there was much in the pre-Reformation world that was beautiful. Has it been worth it for what we've gained? And I think we don't spend enough on those things. I also really want to name that some of the trends that Sorab has named, that he puts at the feet of the reformers started way before. There was no great unified church since the great schism of the 6th century. Duns Scotus and William of Ockham and nominalism planted the seeds far earlier for some of these intellectual trajectories, as many people have acknowledged. Erasmus, a Renaissance humanist, going back to the sources, began to question just how rational medieval scholasticism was, as it began to spot some errors, perhaps some mistranslations. So I want to say, which Reformation, and can we really lay it all at the feet of Luther? But let's say we can lay some of it. Let's name what we would have to sacrifice if we were going to go back. We would have to sacrifice, quite possibly, literacy, the democratization of knowledge. You can come after me later. Yes, the technology of the printing press that was incredibly well timed with Luther's writing is a part of the picture here. And these debates, these questions, ordinary people for the first time thinking, well, what would happen if I got hold of these texts? What might I find if I read the Bible for myself? Drove literacy, which, as James Marriott has been arguing, has driven so many of the things that we love about the West, so much that is good about our culture that we want to hang on to. I am, as a Protestant, incredibly grateful to be able to read the Bible in my own language, and I'm grateful just to be able to read. I'm a married woman. I wouldn't have been allowed to do that. I want to keep hold of individual conscience. Yes, in its secularized and extreme forms, it can lead us to individualism, but I don't think if we're honest, any of us would want to lose it. And let's be honest, it was in the tradition before. It's not like anyone under Roman Catholicism has thought of this. But the Reformation really cracked open this principle as a way that we want to order societies, as a way we want to protect ourselves against institutional authority which can become tyrannical. I would want to keep the fundamental tinder, the question that started this whole thing, about whether you can pay for prayers. Remember, this started about indulgences. Luther actually had quite a limited vision. He did not want to tear everything down. He kept many standard Catholic doctrines until the end of his life. He just wanted money to stop being a corrupting influence on the monastic movement. And it's perhaps as someone who's very interested in monasticism, ironically, given that Henry VIII looted the monasteries in the UK, that I am most grateful for the Reformation. Because if you have people who are devoted to prayer, who want to live lives of simplicity and holiness away from the games of power and politics, their value in that system as prayers went up. And the wealthy people who wanted to outsource their virtue decided that they could buy virtue. And that's bad for the people that are paying for salvation, because we need virtuous elites if we're going to have elites at all. And it was bad for the brothers and sisters who then had money flowing into their originally simple ascetic houses that they then had to figure out how to steward and what to do with. And again, you see this cycle of a monastic movement launched simply, carefully, humbly. It looks like a good place to pay people to pray for you. Money floods in. Things begin to change. I think if we are intellectually honest with ourselves, we can question the loss of community, the loss of shared meaning, the sacramental imagination. We can grieve those things. And if we're really honest, know that we would not go back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. To continue the case for the proposition is Reverend Giles Fraser.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to have a glass of wine with me because I'm not like one of those moralistic fun sponges on the other side of the debate. Now, listen, I was going to start in a different way, but I'm going to have to challenge what you said about indulgences. I really am having to challenge about this. I have, my friends, brought with me a copy of the Canterbury Tales, which is just Chaucer's finest work. And in there is the Pardoner's Tale. And the Pardoner in the Canterbury Tales, written 100 years or so before Luther ever drew breath, is actually one of the most excoriating attacks. The Pardoner is, if you've read the Canterbury Tales, you know the Pardoner is a wicked, awful man attacked by Chaucer. And the Pardoner makes money through his sermons and all of that malarkey. This is a more excoriating attack on the sale of priestly stuff than anything you get with Luther. And here's the point, he was buried with full honours in Westminster Abbey. Okay, it was possible to attack the sale of indulgences without splitting the church. And by the way, the Roman Catholic Church itself stopped this 30, 40 years after the Luther's Reformation in the Council of Trent. So, I mean, this is no one disagrees with that. Even Sorab in his high Catholic, what shall I call it? Whatever it is, he's not going to defend the sale of indulgences. Listen, Henry VIII Henry VIII is the nearest thing to Donald Trump that there is. There's even a passing resemblance. Okay, there's even a passing resemblance. And Henry VIII, like Donald Trump, was a great fan of titles. Okay, liked having titles. And if you get a coin out of your pocket, ladies and gentlemen, get a coin out of your pocket, if you've got one, you'll see on it the letters, if it's the Queen or the King, doesn't matter, the letters FD, Fide Defensor. It was a title given to Henry VIII by Leo X in 1521. It's a defender of the faith. And it's never been renounced by the kings and queens of this country. There is something about the Reformation in this country which is incomplete. Some people want to complete it, but it hasn't. That's why I, an Anglican priest, am on this side, okay? I am a Catholic. I'm not a Roman Catholic. I don't like being told what to do by a bloke in an Italian city. So that side of me has a bit of a protester about it. I'm a strong Brexiteer. I'm against the Treaty of Rome, and I'm against the Bishop of Rome having authority over us. And that's where Sorab and I have a different view. But if we're going to be honest about what happened in the Reformation destroyed, laid waste to a whole infrastructure of religiosity unnecessarily. It destroyed the monasteries, and the destruction of the monasteries, it has to be said, is a tragedy of epic proportions. It destroyed equivalent of our NHS. It destroyed the equivalent of our university system. Luther hated monks, and he was wrong about the religious. It destroyed, also I have to say, the convents. And the convents were the place in which women had authority. After the Reformation, the option for women is domesticity. Before the Reformation, you had the great Hildegardes of Bingen and all this sort of stuff. There is a real problem with that destruction of religious infrastructure that happened through the tragedy that was the Reformation. My friends, it's not just that. Elizabeth rightly alluded to the fact that one of the things you get if you just go, it's me and God and nobody else, is you get the beginnings of individualism. Now, this is a very serious charge because individualism is one of those things. I'm a communitarian. I believe in strong communities. But the idea that it's just you and this horizontal axis and not a vertical axis rather than horizontal axis, you know what I meant. The fact that it's just a vertical axis and it's just you and the Almighty destroys a sense that we're all in it together. The art, the architecture, the whole infrastructure. So I blame the Reformation, I blame Luther for the corruption of individualism in our society. So those are the big charges. It destroyed a whole culture. It made iconoclasm the norm and everything had to be overthrown. In the end, all you get is atheism from Protestantism. It destroyed the infrastructure. It gave us individualism. It was very, very bad for women. But here is my last and most important point. Martin Luther is an Augustinian monk. And if you read the great St. Augustine, my hero, St. Augustine gave us a theology of grace, the idea that fundamentally Pelagianism is wrong and the whole initiative is from God top down. That idea, Luther basically nicked. He put it on steroids, but there is nothing, and we're going to hear this differently now, but there is nothing much more that you have in Luther. Luther was an extraordinary charismatic character. I'd love to go for a drink with him. He was he swore. He was enormous fun. But he was basically St. Augustine on steroids, and he didn't realise that what he was destroying held people together, and was the sort of great infrastructure of love in this country and others. He split the church. He gave us a culture war that was unnecessary. It would have righted itself. It righted itself soon after the Reformation. So my own view is that the Reformation didn't need to happen. I am not a Roman Catholic. I grew up singing songs that would appall my friend there. There's a hymn, I don't know if you know this hymn, "We are English Catholics, oh happy we shall be when all are English Catholics and an end to popery." It's not one you sing anymore. I'm a Catholic.
30 seconds, Giles.
I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I think the Reformation was a mistake. I think it was a mistake because it destroyed so much of what bound us together, and that beautiful sort of holistic vision of us living together in community with faith is what was destroyed by Luther. I think Luther is responsible for modern atheism.
Thank you, Giles. To close out the opening speeches and conclude the opposing motion, Graham Tomlin.
Oh, sorry, I've left that.
There you go. Canterbury Tales back for you. There you go. Good. Thank you. Well, whenever I used to teach theology, I would always encourage my students when they were answering a question on a paper to question the question. And I guess I want to begin by doing that, by asking, well, if the Reformation was a mistake, whose mistake was it? And I want to suggest that if there was a mistake in the Reformation, it was not Luther's mistake, it was the mistake of Leo X. Because it was Leo X was the Pope who threw out Luther. Luther never wanted to leave the Catholic Church. And my basic argument is that the Reformation was not a rejection of Catholicism, but it was an attempt at a renewal of it. It was a deeply Catholic movement in its own way. And what the Reformation was responding to was not the great history of patristic orthodoxy that goes back to the early church, but it was a response to particular developments in late medieval theology and philosophy that had brought the church in a more Pelagian direction than the one that I think Giles thinks was there in the church at the time. And if you read recent scholarship on the Reformation, much of that wants to say that there's a great deal of overlap between medieval scholastic theology and what later developed in Protestantism as well, which actually goes against the idea that the Reformation was this opposing faith to reason, as Sorab has suggested earlier on. Actually, when you look at Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, it's estimated that probably 90% of it the Reformers agreed with. They simply disagreed with some of the elements of soteriology, its understanding of salvation, and its understanding of the church. And the mistake of the Reformation was that it was badly handled by the Roman Catholic Church. What could have been a renewal movement, drawing it back to its sources, drawing it back to a true Augustinian theology of grace, was lost because prematurely the Reformers were shown the door. I often think of what happened in those other renewal movements that happened a couple of centuries before, the rise of the Dominican and the Franciscan movements that could easily have split the church. And you had a pope like Innocent III who was wisely able to contain them within the church of the time. Sad thing is that Leo X wasn't able to do that. He was more interested in buying up Renaissance paintings and decorating the papacy and the Vatican with them. So I want to suggest that the Reformation was itself this renewal movement within Catholicism, which was badly handled. Because it was at its heart trying to restore this deeply Augustinian idea that our worth as human beings before God and before each other is not based on our performance, not based on our achievement, not based on our piety, not based on being a good Christian. Instead, it is based in God's favor towards us, not our own merits, but on the merits of Jesus Christ. And in our anxious and performance-based world, I would suggest that is a message we badly need to hear.
Great.
And there were developments in late medieval theology that implied something very different, that salvation was based on doing your best, on what Luther would call works. It was a kind of a resurgence of that ancient Pelagian heresy. And the Reformation was an attempt to kind of put that down and restore true Augustinian theology of grace. But I also want to suggest that the Reformers were actually right on most things. And that's shown by the fact that actually the Roman Catholic Church since then has gradually caught up over the years. So, for example, one of the great claims of the Reformation was that the Bible should be made available in the vernacular for ordinary people to read, as Elizabeth has reminded us. And of course, in Vatican II, what do you find? In the statement on Dei Verbum, the Word of God, we find this: easy access to the sacred scripture should be provided for all the Christian faithful. At last, the Roman Catholic Church realizes what the Reformers were asking for right in the beginning, making the Bible available in vernacular languages across the world. Faith, justification by faith. Luther's insight that faith, trust, is at the heart of our relationship with God, as it's at the heart of our relationship with each other. In 1999, the Roman Catholic Church signed an agreement with the Lutheran Church, the Joint Declaration on Justification, the Doctrine of Justification, which shows how close they had become. We confess, they say together, that sinners are justified by faith in the saving action of God in Christ. Realizing that what the Roman Catholic Church has maybe learned quite a bit from Luther over the years. The laity. The medieval church seemed to Luther at the time very clerically dominated by priests, where the calling of the priest or the monk was higher than that of the cobbler or the lawyer. And the church needed a reformation of its attitudes towards lay people, the value of secular work. What do we find in recent papal trends? And with Pope Francis, Pope Leo, the whole story of synodality is trying to bring lay voices, women's voices, back into the church, just what Luther wanted to happen. The Reformation was a reaffirmation of the local church against this global institution of the papacy a long way off. The Reformation was about local languages. The emphasis on the local church as the place where sacraments and the word are present. You don't need all this extra stuff that's there. And so, if you like, the Reformation was England's first Brexit moment. And a good Brexiteer like Giles should really be on our side of the debate on this one. So what I want to suggest is that the Reformation was really true evangelical Catholicism. It was badly handled, but I don't think, at the end of the day, it was a mistake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you all. You will see that the safety of the lectern is being removed, which means now the luxury of having some time to yourself to speak is over. We're going to take about 20 minutes to respond to what we've heard in those opening statements. I find sometimes it's helpful to go backwards in time effectively and restart with the first speaker. So, Sorab, I'll start with you. But at this point, you are allowed to obviously respond to anything you've heard, and I am not going to stop you interrupting each other. In fact, I would highly encourage you to. But Sorab, you go for it. If there's anything there you would like to bring up.
Yeah, I'd like to address Bishop Graham's point, which I think he makes a good point, but then, as the reformers themselves did, takes it a step too far. That is, it's true that there were trends in the pre-Reformation church that you might say began to take the church toward a sort of Pelagianism. It's named after Pelagius, one of the great in not in a good way, but one of the heresiarchs of
Scottish.
And the idea was that I can be the source of my own salvation, auto-salvation, that just by being heroically moral, I can secure my salvation, that I don't need grace, and therefore I don't need the church and a sacramental structure to help me on the way. That is correct as a sort of a critique that lots of Catholic thinkers have since granted to Luther and his followers. Indeed, Yves Congar, the great 20th century theologian, said that had Luther stuck to about that point of saying there is a primacy of grace, I'll get to what he actually reached, but a primacy of grace, then there would have been a Lutheran order in the church in the same way that we talk about a Franciscan order, a Jesuit order, or what have you. It would be one more. However, and so in that sense, and he's right, the church has since I would say, not corrected itself, but issued documents that have clarified this to say that there is a primacy of grace, that salvific action begins with God's love on the cross. All fine. But Luther doesn't stop there. He talks about sola gratia, only grace. And that begins, first of all, at a basic level. It should strike you as somehow illogical, that I am once and for all saved, therefore my actions don't matter. Obviously, I mean, there's so many biblical counter witnesses to that, not least James saying that faith without works is dead. But even logically speaking, it's the kind of like, there's something odd about that. But there's a philosophical reason why it's wrong. And the error begins, and here I will say that Elizabeth was right as well, that some of the philosophical errors that I kind of mainly attribute to the Reformation putting into effect, to calamitous effect, began with the likes of Scotus and Occam. However, I mean, I think the reformers then take that and turn it into an attack on the church in a way that Scotus, who's considered a blessed, never did. So, and what I mean by that is, and I'll stop here, I'll be very quick. Essentially, Luther begins with a philosophy in which being is this one field in which God and creation are on the same level. Therefore, if I say that I did something and that I'm trying to do good, in a way it must take away from grace, for the grace of God. However, in the more Aristotelian-informed teaching of St. Thomas, the relationship between those two are actually vertical but also analogical. That is, if I do good, yes, it's God that's prompting me to do so, but my good actions don't take away from the grace of God. That if I act well, it's a reflection of the grace of God. And that's the kind of analogical relationship. And Luther rejects this. Therefore, you get grace alone. And the church, the Catholic Church, has always insisted that that's going too far. So the point I'm trying to make here, and I invite the bishop to respond, is that he takes the church's concessions on some points and turns them into essentially propositions that go much further than the Catholic Church has ever granted, either in Trent or the Second Vatican Council. Thank you.
Graeme, you got any response to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Sorab. Good points and good questions. I mean, I'm not sure it's true to say that Luther thinks that good works don't matter. He has a treatise on good works where he writes about how important good works are. And the good works are the fruit of what he calls justification. And he implies that if there's no good works, there is no justification that's going on. He just wants to draw a strict line between them because he wants to say that once you start to say that somehow my sense of worth, the love of God for me is somehow sparked off by my offering my works to God, then you begin to bring into doubt the sense of salvation. He just wants to draw lines between faith and works in that way. He's not saying that works don't matter. And it's not just Luther, of course. The other point is that if you saw like Melanchthon was Luther's right-hand man in Wittenberg. In 1528, Melanchthon has a meeting with Cardinal Contarini, who's one of the great cardinals of the Catholic Church at the time. And they actually come to an agreement on justification by faith. They come to an agreement. And the problem was that when they went back to Luther and they went back to the Vatican, the agreement didn't stick. But it shows how close these things were at the time and how possible it was that they could have been something like the Dominicans or the Franciscans, that the Lutheran, or at least the Reformation, could have stayed within the church if it hadn't been ejected in 1521, 7 years earlier. I think that's the problem. And I think the other thing I would want to say, I'd want to emphasize the point that Elizabeth made and that Sorab made as well. I see the origins of things like, modern individualism, atheism, the things that Giles was talking about. I see those as drawing out of other movements in the Reformation. I see them coming out of late medieval nominalism. I see them coming out of the Renaissance. I see them coming out of the Enlightenment. The disenchantment of the modern world is the fruit of the Enlightenment, not the fruit of the Reformation.
Giles, do you want to reply to that?
So can I just... so there may be people here who are not theologians. I don't know who would be attracted to this debate, who are not, but nonetheless, I just want to say what this Pelagian stuff is really all about in a sort of more obvious way. I think the best model of the church is Alcoholics Anonymous. And why I think it's Alcoholics Anonymous is that I think one of the first things you have to do is you have to admit your own incapacity to sort yourself out. Now, that's one of the things that you say, there has to be something else that can come and sort me out. Now, that's the basic Pelagian Augustine, sort of in a secular way. Either you save yourself or something is going to do it from outside. But, and this is where I agree with Sorab, you need the community of people that you're with to help you through that. Okay, it may not be I'm saving myself from the dreaded grape, but you know that I need to accept my own incapacity. But you also need the other people that come to AA with you, and that's why church is important. And the thing I'd say about the reformers, and you know who was wrong, Leo X, Luther, whatever. I mean, that's just you know, there's a bit of me that doesn't really care about who was the bad guy in this. But the consequence of what happened, whoever fault it was, is that the church bit, the we all come together bit, got fractured. Now that's really important, especially if you're an alcoholic, and that those groups fail, and those groups are split apart. We actually all agree now that actually you have to go, I cannot help myself. I have not power in myself to help myself, and that power has to come from without. But it's other people, the church, the group that you're in, that help support me in that way through. And that's why this Pelagianism, Augustine, Luther stuff is, I think, really phenomenally important.
Can I offer a different... Because I think this is... One, it's just lovely to have us all acknowledging there's a lot of nuance here and a lot of closeness. But I've sat with this question of, like, was the splitting of the church as much as of a tragedy as it's often described as? And, because I read the Bible, that there is definitely a sense in which, like, the grief of the loss of unity is a real thing. The fact that you guys are doing a beautiful job of being clergy, presenting the gospel in this beautiful way, and I just want to cheer on Church of England clergy doing such a beautiful job. But because I am interested in people coming to know the love of God, my experience is, and we're seeing this in renewed interest amongst young people, is that we're so particular as humans that my hunch is that we need a range of ways in. And that actually our temperament and our lives and our appetite for kind of authority and hierarchy, which like can be a beautiful thing that draws some people to the Catholic Church, but for some people that's their absolute nightmare and they wouldn't go anywhere near it. And there are parts of the body of Christ that can be a place of safety and welcome for them. I'm a charismatic. I really need like transcendent experiences. I need to dance. I need to pray in tongues. That very precious sense I have of like direct or mediated encounter with divine love is the whole reason I'm a Christian. And I think if only the Catholic Church had been available in its beautiful liturgical ritual forms, I don't know if I ever would have got through the door. So there is a grief and a tragedy to disunity, but I actually believe that it's possible that that's being used in beautiful ways, and the breadth and the particularity of the body of Christ that exists now might not have had the space to breathe if we had not cracked it open in that very painful way.
If you're seeing my face, that means it's the end of your free 15-minute preview. But here's some good news. If you want to carry on watching from where you left off, plus join in our subscriber-only Q&A, and get everything else UnHerd has to offer, then it's very simple. All you have to do is go to unherd.com/live and become a subscriber now. Join our free thinking family. I promise you, you won't regret it. Stop scrolling and start learning. If you want to pick up on this Reformation debate that you were just watching, then it's super simple. Just go to unherd.com/live, and for the price of a coffee, but far more stimulating, I promise, we have everything UnHerd has to offer. That's all of our live streams beamed straight into your inbox, plus all of our long-form journalism, video interviews, podcasts, and more. You name it, you've got it. unherd.com/live.